Good afternoon. Welcome to Al Jazeera YouTube Live. Each week we have a Q&A session where we discuss the key issues that affect the week. However, as it's the beginning of 2017, we want to discuss a very important issue that rocked the United States over the past 12 months. It's not the US presidential election, it's not Donald Trump, but it's a campaign called Black Lives Matter, a grassroots campaign that began in 2012, highlighting the killings that were taking place amongst the Afro-American community, most notably by the police. Well, with me is Dwayne Oxford from Al Jazeera, who's American himself, and with him we will be discussing what is Black Lives Matter, why did this campaign come about, and what's the future for Black Lives Matter. Now, you yourselves can give your comments, views and questions by messaging on the YouTube wall itself or sending in tweets at AJ English, and hopefully we will try and answer them these questions ourselves. So, Dwayne, thank you for taking time out talking about Black Lives Matter. But before we go into the detail, just explain to our viewers out there, what is Black Lives Matter?
Black Lives Matter is a social and political movement with its main purpose to upend some of the institutional racism, social and political movements in America, hyperviolence against people of color, predominantly black lives in America.
So it started in 2012. Mainly it was due to the fact that it seemed that a lot of killings were taking place within the black community, yes, mostly by the police. So was this a kind of a protest movement? Was it something to highlight the injustices, or was it just done because of sheer frustration?
Well, I think the catalyst was the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012 in Baltimore. I think the way that the killing happened really kicked off what I would say a continuation of movements that have happened in America as it relates to preservation of black lives.
So it's now 2017. Where has the Black Lives Matter movement gone? I mean, at what stage is it? Is it some nationwide campaign that's achieved something, or is it just a knocking shop exercise?
I think that the main goals is really to change policy in America as it relates to police enforcement, as it relates to the prison industrial complex. What are the type of policies, what are the type of institutions that are responsible for the incarceration of black lives, as well as the type of social institutions that we need to put in place in order to preserve black people in different communities in America.
Now the USA has a history of race relations, from the start of slavery to the abolition of slavery to the civil rights movement and the icons of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, to people like Jesse Jackson. So there's always been a race relations history in the US. I was in the USA a few months ago, and they opened up the museum in Washington, documenting the contribution of African Americans. So African Americans are an integral part of US society. Now, in terms of population, from what I know, the African American community is 12% of the US population, which is around, the African American population is around 46 million. But a lot of negative connotations take place. So, for example, even though it's 12% of the US population, over 40% of inmates in federal or even state jails are black. Poverty lines, apparently 24% of people living in poverty in the USA are black. Attainment levels are low. People in power or in government or in politics or in business, the numbers are low. So it seems that the African American community has severe problems. So where does Black Lives Matter fit into that?
So I think what's really important is for people to understand that there's a historical backdrop in America as it relates to what is happening in the black community today. If you think about a nuclear bomb going off, there's always an after effect. It's not done once all the destruction happens. So you need to think about what are the institutions that have been in place and what are their impact and what are the type of reforms that need to happen in order to reverse some of the destruction that's happened in a lot of these communities. I think Black Lives Matter is a continuation of that history, of that struggle to resist the types of policies that are related to institutional racism. And we're also talking about economics, community, healthcare, basically your way of life. What are the types of institutional policy changes? Because what this is really about, this is about policy. And policy are the types of things that actually turn things around in your community. So we have to broaden the ideal of what does it mean to preserve Black life in America.
So I want to stop there. Of course, people watching can send your comments, questions, or opinions on the YouTube page itself on Al Jazeera, or send us your tweets on AJ English and try and get your comments in, and hopefully we'll try and answer some of these questions. But let's talk about police, law and order. So I've got some stats here. In 2015, 990 people were killed by police officers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, according to the Washington Post, only 258 of them were black. Apparently more white people were killed by police officers. Now let's go to 2016. 708 documented deaths in police shootings. Only 173 of them were black. 325 of them were white. People tend to say that more white people are killed than black people. So why are the African American community constantly up in arms about it, when their numbers apparently are lower?
No, if you actually look at the numbers, 21 times are more likely for a black person of the similar age would be killed by the cops, and clearly that is the type of numbers that are alarming. And I really want to make it very, very clear that a lot of these numbers, we can research and look at the numbers, but at the end of the day, we have an institutional problem in America. And it's a false equivalency to think that, if a black life is dying somewhere, then what about other lives? As if focusing on Black Lives Matter means that you're not completely consumed with the lives of others. It's not. It's this is a movement. This is a challenge. This is a wake-up call to build awareness about changing policy in America. But
why has there always been, and as a non-American, and no doubt some of our viewers from other parts of the world will always say, why has there always been this disproportionate relationship between someone from the African American community, a black person, and the police?
I mean, this is about history. This goes all the way back to the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, you could even go back to the Underground Railroad with Harriet Tubman. What we're talking about is a continuation of undermining the types of policies that have put people of color in a position of disempowerment. And this is the history of America. It's something that needs to be acknowledged.
But has it been acknowledged?
I think some people have acknowledged it, but what is also happening is that the type of policies and institutions have not been put in place to undermine and reverse some of the problems that we're seeing today. So people think that these problems have been helicopter dropped out of nowhere. There is a deep intrinsic history that's tied to what you're actually seeing today. And I would encourage people to go a step further and start researching some of the works, some of the sources that really bring clarity to the present situation that people of color are living in today in America.
You're watching Al Jazeera YouTube Live with me, Hassan Patel, and Al Jazeera's Dwayne Oxford, and we're talking about Black Lives Matter. And of course, you can send your questions or comments on our YouTube page, or send a tweet to AJ English, and hopefully we'll try and attempt to answer them. Now, we have one question already from Twitter, from Jill Jingle, and she's asking, is that Black Lives Matter, I'll kind of rephrase the question. Black Lives Matter, it's kind of gone beyond just the US now. It's taken an international standing, and a lot of people have been privy to what's taking place in the USA. But But what do the likes of the UN or other NGOs like Amnesty say about Black Lives Matter? Has it actually dented any of these campaigns, or is it just one of many campaigns throughout the world?
I mean, to be honest, I'm not aware of all the different organizations that have acknowledged Black Lives Matter. Clearly, there has been a lot of solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. You see movements in Germany, Canada, all over the world, where people are under the same type of situation, even though they're not in America. So people can relate and connect when you're disempowered, when you're disenfranchised, when you don't have the tools and the resources to actually empower yourself. I think that that's something that any individual can relate to. So it's good to see that people are acknowledging Black Lives Matter, but it doesn't stop with a tweet or a like or something that you share. It's something that we need to participate in on a global scale.
Now, as I mentioned before to you, Black Lives Matter was created in 2012. I think it was after the killing of Trayvon Martin.
Correct.
But subsequently more killings took place, and the campaign had a groundswell support in areas like Baltimore and other parts of the USA. It's 2017. Has there been any change or shift in police policy of how they relate to Black lives?
As I said earlier, it's a work in progress. You're going to see, I'm hoping that with this new administration that Black Lives Matter can get a foothold and really start to contribute to the necessary policy changes that need to happen at a police level, especially prison reform. I think the goal, the initiatives extend beyond just, what is now unfortunately a household name, police brutality. We're all very familiar with this. I think we need to move and grow and extend other types of policies that we're going to change within each local community.
You constantly keep on saying policy and change and policy and change. Has this campaign actually created any seismic change in policy? Or is the USA so disorganized in some ways that federal and state that it just can't happen?
I mean, I think you need to put pressure on your politicians. You need to put pressure on the institution. You need to put pressure on thought leaders. You need to put pressure on activists who are part of these structures. All these things will contribute, hopefully, in a way that really adds to something very, very transformative. Because this is what we're looking for, something big. And as you know, if we think about the civil rights movement, this was not an overnight success.
Of course.
There's years of grit, years of struggle, and years of sacrifices and even blood in order to fulfill the vision of the civil rights movement. So I really see Black Lives Matter as a continuation of upending the types of social institutions that continue to undermine lives in local communities.
A lot of people say that Black Lives Matter have made no impact. They haven't really taken on the mantle of the civil rights movement. So, for example, Barbara Reynolds, who was a civil rights activist, calls Black Lives Matter a motley crew. Other civil rights activists or veterans say that the tactics of Black Lives Matter it's anti-police, it's anti-establishment. It's not causing change in a positive way, but it's causing change in revolt and in violence.
I would say that those are distractions, and I would also say that during the civil rights movement there were distractors, there were people who were not for that movement then. So you're always going to have critics. No one is saying that the Black Lives Matter movement is perfect, and I don't think any movement in history has ever been perfect as the way it's orchestrated. It matures, it grows, it changes. You take unconventional approaches in order to get the job done. So I think it's way too early to be to have let's say a referendum on the Black Lives Matter movement.
Interesting you say it's way too early. Some people just call it a reinvention of the wheel of Malcolm X of defiance versus Martin Luther King of peace.
Yeah, but people should understand that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were friends. They weren't at polar opposites of each other, even though at times a lot of people like to convey they were, as we say, singing from the same hymn sheet.
But a lot of this criticism coming towards Black Lives Matter shows that not everyone's comfortable with this, that people feel slightly uncomfortable if protests are taking place in the street and you're calling police officers pigs, or you're creating some kind of action against them which isn't through peace but through protest.
Peaceful protest, and I hope that for people who are uncomfortable with certain types of language, which I believe are smear tactics, I would hope that they're uncomfortable with the idea of an innocent person getting their head blown off by a cop when this person has not done anything wrong. We should be troubled by that. We should be troubled by innocent people getting shot to death in the middle of the street. That's more concerning than a bit of language that might be coming from certain spaces that aren't even really affiliated with the core of Black Lives Matter.
Now, moving on, you wrote an opinion piece a couple of weeks ago talking about race equality in the USA, which kind of touched Black Lives Matter. And it came from the US Muslim scholar Hamza Yusuf, who at a public forum, at a Muslim forum, more or less, it seems, dismissed the whole Black Lives Matter campaign. Surely that doesn't help when you've got figures like Hamza Yusuf, who a lot of black people look up to, especially black Muslims in the USA, distance himself from this campaign.
As I said in the piece, I want to make it very, very clear. I'm very familiar with a lot of the works from Hamza Yusuf. Even as a convert, I've consumed a lot of his content, a lot of his speeches, and I've watched him speak at multiple different conferences. Of course, remotely, nothing. I wasn't in person. However, I think what's really, really important is that if you're going to speak on such a sensitive matter, on such a global matter, on a matter that has to do with the preservation of black lives, that you need to know what you're talking about. You need to have a deep understanding of the subject matter. And unfortunately, Hamza Yusuf gave a very incomplete picture. He told half the story. It's almost like someone trying to explain a picture and they get to the middle of the picture and then they stop. So it was not a thorough, complete picture of what is actually happening in America as it relates to.
But isn't that a microcosm of what's actually taking place in the USA in race relations? It's always the glass is half full or the glass is half empty, and people will always get offended on either side of the debate.
There'll always be people who get offended, but don't let getting offended stop you from interrogating your personal sensibilities about what is happening in a very honest way. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be objective. Let's look within and find out what is actually happening. Let's not get hearsay, and my friend said, and I saw this tweet, and I saw this meme, and that can't tell the full story. Honest work, digging through sources, books, information, this is lifelong work in order to understand a very complex problem. And a complex problem deserves a complex approach, not going through the fast lane and trying to figure out what's happening with a backstory that is hundreds of years in the making.
Now, it's funny you say about a complex approach. Nick Abbas on YouTube has just wrote in saying, should Black Lives Matter not just should address the black on black crime, because surely that's the biggest cause of deaths in the black community. So I think in the indirect way he's trying to say, surely the African American community should sort themselves out first before they want to pick on the establishment.
I think, to be honest, and I've heard this criticism a lot, I think it's a distraction. One event is different from another. So it's not to say we can't focus on multiple things. We can. It's highlighting the type of institutional injustices that are happening in America. That doesn't mean that you can't participate, or anyone can participate, including Black lives, in trying to fix what's been deemed black on black crime. So
Just explain to our viewers, what is black on black crime? I mean, what's the definition of it, and what are the key areas?
I think it's fairly obvious. I mean, it's the type of hyper violence that happens in black communities, where predominantly gun violence that happens in these type of communities, and it's one black individual against another.
And in proportion to white on white crime, is there a difference?
I think there's a difference, but I think what's really important, and I want to really revisit this, is getting into a numbers game to try to justify a certain type of distance to what the core problem is a big mistake.
Isn't that what Hamza Yusuf did? He got himself to a numbers game, saying, well, there's more white people being killed by the blacks. There's more black on black crime taking place. So we should have all lives matter rather than Black Lives Matter. Well, he didn't say that, but most people assumed or followed that approach.
To be honest, if we were seeing the same type of hyper violence that was happening in white communities, then it would actually make complete sense, but we're not.
Yes.
Relative to the population of America, we're seeing a lot of hyper violence that's happening in communities of color, and this is a huge problem, and it hasn't been addressed yet.
Now, moving on, it was a cold November in 2008, and Chicago was celebrating, not just Chicago, but the world, the first black president of the United States. There's an iconic image of Jesse Jackson, the civil rights leader, crying his eyes out. And people said, that's it, we've now reached a post-racial American society. 2016, you've got quite possibly the most racist administration coming into power. What happened in those 8 years from at the peak of success, you can say, for black people, to despair in some cases?
I think what's important is to understand that the 2008 election is a moment in history. That's it. It's a good moment. It shows progress.
Okay.
And that should be respected, but that's not the complete picture. The figurehead or the race of the president is not the thing that impacts policies on the ground. It's not the only thing.
Because if it did, then you would not need to have Black Lives Matter.
Exactly, if that was the case.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's symbolic. It should be respected for what happened. Even though there are certain types of policies that I don't agree with Barack Obama, but at the same time, I think it's a big mistake to say, well, this is the black president, where some post-racial environment. And to be honest, a lot of my black friends, when we heard this, and I don't know where it came from, it was we found it comical. We're saying, apparently you haven't been to what's happening in Baltimore. Apparently you haven't been to Chicago. Apparently you haven't been to what's going on in New York, even on the day that he was inaugurated. The same type of environment, the same type of things that were happening pre-Obama are happening post-Obama, and they will continue to happen unless we make the effort to really put in place the type of foundation that undermines these institutional structures that disempower people of color.
Now, of course, we can have probably not just half an hour, but probably a year of conversation about race relations under Obama. But I just want to give you another stat.
Sure.
This was according to the Pew. In 2008, 75% of black voters believed that Obama's election would lead to better race relations in the USA. Fast forward to 2016, 74% of black voters now believe that race relations would worsen under Trump. That's a 180 turn. Going on from that, Jamal Rashid is asking the question on YouTube, will blacks see more justice under the Trump administration? So there's hope and despair here. And where do you see Black Lives Matter in this Trump era?
More important than ever before, but as I've said earlier, we have to look at this as a movement. What happened in 2008 was a moment. And we need to invest in the types of things that are transformative. And I think there was some hope because it's the first time that we've ever had a black president. But at the same time, we can't keep our eye off the ball. To focus on that as the catalyst for change is a huge mistake. It's the unglamorous work that you do with activists, with politicians at the local level, keystone individuals that have the power to change things. That is where the work is. It's the stuff that you don't see. It's not the stuff that you see on Twitter. It's not the stuff you see on Facebook. Although they're great social media vehicles to explain, to distribute your ideology, but that's not the end game.
Not
It's
the
far
end
from
game.
it.
So it's 2017. We are now entering the Trump era, and of course, the USA, like any other country, is going through change. What do you see the future of Black Lives Matter?
I see it as a key organization that will continue to do the work that's been passed on from our ancestors. This is a continuation. This is what people need to understand. This isn't a moment. This is a movement. There's good work that's been done before Black Lives Matter, and there will be good work that will be done after.
But as a Black American yourself, no doubt, and friends that you have in the family, are they more vulnerable? Do they feel more vulnerable now than they've ever been before?
Yeah, I mean, I think seeing the recent attacks, I mean, if you look at some of the stats from the Southern Poverty Law Center, it does seem somewhat bleak at times, but you still need to be hopeful. You still need to push. You still need to nudge change in the right direction. You can't be afraid to make change. You can't be afraid to disrupt what has been built for hundreds of years. This is the key to change. So regardless of who's president, it doesn't matter. What matters is the good work that's being done at the ground level, that's transformative, that can extend, that can protect, that can empower Black lives economically.
But as a young Black American man in the USA, say in the southern part of the country, what's his situation like in 2017 compared to, say, his father or grandfather in 1957? I mean, has there been a change, or?
Of course, I mean, of course, there's been progress, but there's more work to do. We're not done yet, and we're far from it. We're far from it. There's lots of progress to be made. I think some key initiatives that Black Lives Matter have discussed is prison reform, police reform, economic empowerment. I mean, these are all initiatives that we've been discussing for years, and I think it's nice to see a movement carrying the baton and moving it forward. To kind of create these big tent items that people can connect to, that people can see. And I would really encourage people, if you've heard anything today that makes you uncomfortable, or maybe there's something that you've heard that has inspired you, the key is to keep doing the good work. There's lots of good resources out there, lots of great books. I mean, you have things like Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow. You have Dr. DeGruy, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Just elaborate a bit on the post-traumatic slave syndrome. I mean, what's his key message?
I mean, so Dr. DeGruy, one of the things that she discussed is that there is a history, and if you notice throughout this Q&A, I've been really enforcing that there is a history to these things. It's like a building that you see. The building didn't just come out of nowhere.
There's a foundation.
There's a foundation. There's a structure. And I think this is the part where a lot of people lack, is they don't understand the context and the history. And I'm not saying that that's easy. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience. And you really have to hold yourself accountable because there's a lot of information. But you have to do it. If you want to understand the subject matter, and this relates to Hamza Yusuf and many people who believe that they have the authority to speak on Black lives, that you need to make sure that you do the due diligence to make sure that you're conveying your message and you have a deep understanding of these matters.
So you, in conclusion, say that you should know your history in order to plan for your future.
As part of it, and to take action, obviously.
And Black Lives Matter is just a peg in the system
A big
of campaigns and awareness that's been going on and will continue to go on.
Yeah, and that actionable data should lead to something transformative.
Dwayne Oxford, Al Jazeera's Dwayne Oxford, thank you for talking to